Saint Innocent, where the name come from?
My dad's middle name was Innocent,
Okay.
and he brought me up drinking wine.
And the saint part?
He's a saint, not me. He's the closest thing to a saint, or was closest thing to a saint.
Hi, I'm Bill Miller, and today we have Mark Vlasic from Saint Innocent. I'm not going to say iconic because then, well, we think you're iconic, but see there, that's why I didn't want to say it.
I make wine in Oregon, actually in the Willamette Valley, which, if you look at the map of Oregon, is pretty far north and pretty far west. So the valley center is about 50 miles from the ocean, and there's a set of mountains that separates it from the ocean, and that allows us to have nice cool breezes in the evening, but to protect ourselves from the cold winds during the day, which kind of separates it out from what normally happens in California Pinot Noir country, is that they're close to the ocean because otherwise it's too darn hot to
Okay.
grow Pinot Noir. So so it's a place that I came to in another career, and in 1983 I kind of went crazy and decided I wanted to make wine. Spent 5 years figuring it out, and so for the last 29 years I've been making wine in Oregon in a small winery called St. Innocent. It's actually in Salem, which is the capital and also the center of the Willamette Valley.
Okay. Saint Innocent, where the name come from?
My dad's middle name was Innocent,
Okay.
and he brought me up drinking wine.
And the saint part?
He's a saint, not me. He's the closest thing to a saint, or was closest thing to a saint. He really inspired me to sort of discover wine and enjoy wine, taste wine, understand wine. And so when I started the winery, I wanted to name it after my dad, but our last name was Vlasic, and that sounds way too much like a pickle to name a winery after it. So we went with the innocent part, and it made him very happy. I started drinking seriously with my dad when I was 7.
Okay.
So I literally drank wine every day, and he had amazing cellar, and he would tell me all the stories about these things, and I needed to know the story, or I wasn't going to get any wine. So I learned the stories,
That's
and I
fantastic.
became a fairly good taster at a pretty young age. I mean, I was a better taster when I was 15 than I am now, because I did it every day, and my dad would, have little quizzes and bring out a bottle of wine wrapped in a towel and say, okay, this is the domain, and this is the the vineyard, but I got 5 vintages. You got to figure out which one it is, or you're not getting dessert.
And this was his hobby.
Yeah, this is just for fun.
Right.
And that was the kind of
Quizzes just
thing
for
we
fun.
did. So I had a really good idea of what wine tasted like, and what the kind of things that made body. So when I went to vineyards in the early days, and the first vineyards were friends of mine that happened to decide to grow grapes about the time I decided to make wine. I mean, the first vineyard I used was probably easily one of the 5 greatest vineyards in Oregon, Seven Springs. If you think about it, that was 1980. It wasn't very far into the wine industry, but no one told me that. I didn't know what the history of the Oregon wine industry was. I just thought, like California, it existed for a long time. It turned out that when I went to Oregon, for an example, David Adelsheim in 1980 had not released a Pinot Noir ever.
Okay.
So, and David Adelsheim is like, he's one of the grandfathers of the Oregon Pinot Noir industry, and somebody that I have great respect for. So I kind of watched it grow up. And in '83, when I decided I was going to do this, and '88, when I started the winery, there weren't very many people. There was only about 40 people making Pinot Noir.
We'll start with the Chardonnay. Want to talk a little bit about this one?
Sure. So, in the beginning, Oregon was mostly planted with equal amounts of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Now there is 14 times more Chardonnay than there is Pinot Noir in Oregon. And that's because the original clones weren't very well suited. And so when people figured that out, they basically had to go back to France and find things that would ripen. At the time that happened, I had 3 different vineyards, 2 of which I chose to replant with new clones. This was one of them. This is a vineyard that's fairly warm. It's called Freedom Hill Vineyard. It's warm in the day so you can get Chardonnay ripe. It's actually quite cool at night because it's very far west, and all the cold wind that spills into the valley spills in the evening off the ocean. Pacific Ocean is cold. You don't swim in the ocean unless you have a wetsuit on. And so you get the balance that you need for Chardonnay, which is about having ripeness and acidity, not just ripeness.
You know what stands out to me? The oak doesn't get in the way.
Yeah, that's because it doesn't have any new oak. Zero. It is off barrel fermented because I think that Chardonnay is primarily a grape that does texture really well. So I want to ferment it in a small container. I want it to be in contact with the lees, but I don't really want to futz with it very much. And that's because there's another part of this wine that I find to be the most fascinating, which is the minerality. Lots of times people think of minerality as kind of this steely, hard-edged thing with the absence of fruit, but I don't believe that that's really what minerality is. I think what minerality is a sense of earth, sense of soil, sense of rocks, but combined with really pretty fruit. You know, you don't have to be unripe in order to get minerality, and this soil is on a very, very old ocean floor sedimentary soil. The analogy in France is Chablis. And so the wine is actually made not like California Chardonnay, not like, heavily wooded and buttery and things like that. It's really made in a very straightforward manner to allow you to taste the prettiness of the fruit, the textures of the lees, and then that kind of almost stony, kind of like a river pebble kind of minerality that's also in it. And what I'm looking for really is a wine to eat with. Mostly Chardonnay in this country is made to just drink with your friends on the deck.
Right. Which
But
you can absolutely do with this.
You can absolutely do it. Yeah, it definitely doesn't have a sign that says no decks allowed.
Right.
It doesn't do that.
Must
but
stick with food.
but it really is nice with a wide variety of things, and I would drink this with a wide variety of things. I mean, I like this with hamburgers, and most people say like you got to be a psychopath to think that a hamburger and Chardonnay, but the balance, the acidity is there, and it really works well. Especially loves the cheese on that hamburger, you know.
Or some of the grease.
Yeah. Well, the
fat.
grease is always good.
Right.
Yeah. So this is Momtazi Vineyard. It's one of the most recent vineyards I picked up. I started making it in 2006. It is also very far west. But in this case, the vineyard is located right at the opening of the pass that leads to the ocean, the only pass through the coast range of mountains that leads to the ocean in wine country. And literally from the top of this vineyard, you can just stare and watch the mountain come down and go back up. And the winds blow right through that pass, right at you when you're on this dome. And the dome is very high, so it has huge exposure. The soil is very difficult, very thin, very poor. And the vineyard the parts I use just way at the top of this vineyard are extremely steep. So it's basically, I call it a hellhole for vines. And what you get is the vine struggles. It struggles, and not just struggles in a simple way, but struggles in a lot of different ways. It struggles to find dirt, it struggles to find water, it struggles to deal with the wind that's blowing off the ocean. And what you get is this texture and this kind of, I call it exotic kind of qualities to it, but also the herbs or the spices become more savory. I like to remind people that if you're not sure what you're smelling, think about yellow curry and the turmeric and the cumin and the coriander and those spices that are in yellow curry, and then smell this wine again. It has a little bit of that tar, that sweet tar, has a little of that kind of tobacco, a little bit of mocha, so a little coffee, a little cocoa powder in it. And but it mostly has this richness. It kind of grabs you, maybe not massages you in your lower mouth. And for me, this is the wine that I love to drink in the winter because it has that umami thing. And in the winter, we gravitate towards pot roast and stew and hot dish.
Right.
And
Comfort.
Yeah, comfort foods. Right. And I always say when it's cold in Oregon it's wet, here it would be snowy, and you want to eat in front of the fireplace, and you have that kind of comfort dish that Mom used to make. This is a really great wine for that because it understands that kind of palate richness.
When you get done trying to figure out everything that's in there. and then it'll change on you.
Yeah.
Because I've set this on the counter and come back to it numerous times, and it changes and evolves.
So we're going to taste two. We're going to taste our estate wine, which is called Zenith Vineyard.
Okay.
It's actually 2013, and I think for me this is the wine that's the easiest thing to match with food. It's just, I call it the wine for all seasons. You're hungry, you want something to drink, drink it. You're thirsty, you want something to drink it. You know, have it with pizza, have it with burgers, have it with salmon. It works. It's an easy wine to enjoy. It's very bright.
Absolutely.
And the fruit is bright.
Traditional notes, the cherries in there.
Yeah. It has really pretty flower components, and the Yosemite Hills is known for these kind of sweet spice qualities. It's got some nice spice on it.
Now, as I said before, out of the gate, you're pretty good, but you've also modified things in how you make it. I know you did the Chardonnay. We talked about that, but you also did that with the Pinot Noir.
I did. You know, I like a lot of Americans, I really did believe that bigger was better. I didn't think of it in terms of bigger was better, but that's kind of how when I look back at it, I approached it. It was like, well, if you've got really nice fruit, the grapes are really ripe, you should extract it. You should ferment it for a long time and try to get all that flavor. So I did long pre-fermentation macerations and some post-fermentation macerations, and and just tried to get everything I could.
Right.
And then I was like, well, when the vintages don't have very much fruit and they're kind of lean, you should probably get whatever you can out of it. So it ended up that I was kind of doing the same thing in both circumstances. And after 10 years, I finally had saved enough money that I could go to Burgundy and meet some of the people that I'd met Burgundians who come to Oregon, and went to taste in a number of really great cellars. And one of them was Meunier-et-Gilbourg. And in Christine's cellar, I remember we were drinking Clos Vougeot, actually. And I just had this moment when I realized that Pinot Noir was not about how much you can get into it. It wasn't about color. It wasn't about tannin. It wasn't about gigantic fruit. It was really all about balance. And that if you were trying for more, you were very likely to miss that balance point when everything was just beautiful.
Right.
Just like the perfect picture. So I came back and changed everything in 1998 and made wines just radically differently, much more gently.
And how was that received, going from the bolder wines that you're producing to the well-balanced? Because that's the theme through everything.
Yeah.
Is you went for more well-balanced instead of the big, bold fruit that Americans love.
Yeah. Well, I guess it would be best said by a customer who came back to me years later and said, always loved your wines. Had your earliest guy who had bought my second vintage, the wine that won the gold medal, and then my 94s, which were very well received, and he said, I always loved your wines, and I'm really glad you went to France. Finding that level of balance in how I was handling when I was picking it, how I was cropping it, how I was fermenting it, how I was aging it, when I was bottling it. All of those little things that people don't really think about. They just think, well, it's a good vintage, it must be good wine. It's a bad vintage, it must be bad wine.
Right.
I have a reputation for making really great wine when it's more hard, when it's more difficult
To do.
when the circumstances are hard.
See, and I think your entire lineup is you. I think we've grown along with you. And you've learned along the ways. And when you said earlier, I knew you were going to say you're lucky. And I'm a lucky guy. I understand what luck is. But there's also the point where I don't think at a point in time that you've ever, when making this wine, when you had it, you were already successful, then you change it.
Yeah.
I think that you constantly have humility and you're always questioning. And you always are trying to evolve and get better.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. Because that's how I love to constantly challenge myself, and then to see that, and in the successful people, and I will throw the word iconic your way, and then that's the last compliment, is that you constantly improve. You never chase the dollar. It's not about making the money. It's about actually growing yourself and what you do. So I think it's fantastic, and for that, cheers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.